Here is one problem with my simple and naive application. Its caching mechanism won't provide the fresh static files when they change. Let's think about this code. The service worker downloads all the static files listed here on installation, and when it intercepts a request for any of these files, it will always return its cached copy. I mean the original copy that was cached on installation. So for such files we will never get to this fetch command and never get a fresh file. This approach is typically called cache only. A real application will consist of something more than a handful of static files, as my example site. There will be requests not cached on installation, and for such requests a service worker will always go to network and will never cache them. It's sometimes called a network-only approach, and it basically means that resources are fetched as normal, as if there was no service worker. Cache-only approach may be okay for the files that are really stable and are unlikely to change. But that's some kind of a joke, because in practice changes come unexpectedly, and it's not very helpful to consider something as completely immutable. So this code isn't suited for real life, and it shouldn't get to production. This naive caching mechanism is quite bad in itself, but it may be handy as a part of a more complicated system, where you use various caching patterns for different types of resources, and this naive mechanism becomes a fallback scenario if no good pattern is found for a given request. Let me show you a bit of code to better understand this. Here is the blueprint of a fetch handler that caches and serves resources in different ways depending on the origin of the intercepted request, a method, a file extension, or anything else. And this naive pattern that's implemented on my website is at the very end of a fetch handler, serving as a fallback in case there was no clever rule for this specific request. But of course here I am getting ahead of myself. For now this approach is maybe too advanced. Anyway, I'd like to draw your attention to this offline-cookbook written by Jake Archibald. This is probably the best guide to caching for network-independent websites. Now let's think what will happen to my project when, let's say, the CSS file changes. For instance, we want to change the background, and for that we update an existing CSS file. Let me change it to red. In a short while the server will start responding with a new color, and to confirm that, let's switch to incognito mode to prevent the service worker magic. Let's check the CSS file. It's new, and the page itself also new and red. But let's go back to normal mode, where my page is still controlled by a service worker. Hit refresh. No, the background didn't change, and it will never change with this service worker. In the Network tab, we can see that it keeps serving the old cached version of style CSS. This version was downloaded when the service worker was installed, and it's installed only once in its lifetime. There is no nice and official way to reinstall a service worker. The browser doesn't give us such a method. But fortunately, we can deliver a new service worker, and this new one will be installed afresh, and on installation it will re-download everything we need. Normally we will update a service worker when we want to make some meaningful changes to our caching strategy. But in this case we just want to trick the browser so that he installed the same service worker once again. Browser installs a new service worker when he sees that a new service worker file is byte different to the existing one. For that, the browser downloads a fresh service worker file every time a user navigates to an in-scope page, and if there is even a tiniest change in this file, a browser will immediately try to install a new one. So we may just remove a line break to simulate a change. It may look really stupid, but it solves the problem. In real life, it may be something more respectable. For instance, you can make a variable that holds a version number, and you will increment this number to trigger the installation. Now we have to wait a little bit, because there is a small delay before GitHub Pages starts serving the new file. Now hit refresh, and the background is still the old one. Well, actually, the installation of a new service worker is a complicated process. So what happened here? The new service worker was installed and it populated the cache storage with new files from the network. But when the page was rendered, we still had the old files there. That's why we don't see the changes yet. So we have to refresh once more, and finally we have a new color. Again, updating a service worker is complicated, and we have a lot more to understand here, but for now let's keep it simple. So we managed to get a fresh background, but was it a great solution? Possibly not, because now it's not enough to just update a CSS file. You have to update a service worker file as well to deliver any changes. But you can make it automatic. I mean, you can make some clever build system where the changes to the static files are automatically reflected in a newly generated service worker file. Basically, I have no serious objections to such automatic approach, and you may try it in real applications. But anyway, it seems too hacky for me, because we have to cheat the browser, pretending that there is a new service worker, while it's actually an old one. And anyway, we need a good caching strategy. It will hopefully solve a problem of fresh static files, and will make these weird hacks unnecessary. So next we will learn how to actually implement a good caching strategy.